Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. This week we're discussing balancing law enforcement and civil liberties, a constitutional perspective on police brutality. Over the course of 2024, we have seen a couple of events seeing the police harass the citizenry, but also recently we saw a very disturbing video coming in from Western Uganda whereby a lady was assaulted by a police officer. And this has sparked discussion across social media, but also throughout the year we have seen in numerous demonstrations, notably when we saw during the March to Parliament where young people took the walk to Parliament, among other incidents where we have seen the rise in police brutality. And today we're just discussing that as we also wrap up the year. I think it's important that we talk about that aspect, but also bring in the constitutional aspect relating it to civil liberties. So joining me to discuss this very interesting but also very pertinent conversation in the year 2024 as we wrap it up is a panel of distinguished ladies and gentlemen who will help us unpack the conversation and put perspective to it. So in no particular order, I'll let my panelists say hello and then we get to the conversation. I'll begin with the lady, say hello, then I'll get to the gents and we can start the conversation.
Positive discrimination.
No, as I said, no particular order and without prejudice.
Hello everyone watching us. My name is Ankunda Allen. I'm a secondary school teacher and I'm so glad to be part of this panel today.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here and looking forward.
I'm here to practice speaking too much English.
No, I think everyone here on this panel definitely speaks very, very good English.
Right.
Yes, the gentleman who had been lost on the show for some time. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Drake, and good afternoon to all our esteemed viewers. My name is Kinobere and Marvin, and once again, it's a pleasure to be part of this wonderful discussion as we contribute our part to nation building and improving the affairs in this country. I'm delighted and I can't wait for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Looking forward to having that conversation with you. Most welcome our regular panelist, but also an author.
Thank you so much, Drake, for having me and the rest of the panelists. But of course, the crew and our esteemed viewers out there. My name is Kwesiga Emmanuel. I am a fourth-year law student at Uganda University, a writer and an East African. Glad to be with you in this particular discussion.
Definitely happy to have you here as well. Alan, take us away. Give us a preamble to this conversation and how you'd like to have this conversation go your way.
So to me, this actually conversation will be discussing the relationship between the handcuffs and the Constitution. They have a very meant relationship that sometimes when you break the laws in the Constitution, you will be having a relationship with the handcuffs eventually. So the police is part of the law enforcement agencies, and its role is to enforce the law that is stated in the Constitution. And these civil liberties are actually fundamental rights that protect individuals and citizens from government outreach or being exploited or from arbitrary treatment. And so today we actually come here to discuss, and I think we want to know why is the police that is actually supposed to be protecting citizens from being harassed, from being tortured, is actually the one that is encroaching on the law that is supposed to enforce. Yeah, that is my very simple understanding of what we are to discuss the viewers today.
Right. Thank you. Emmanuel, kindly also give us your context, how you'd like to take on this debate and conversation.
Thank you so much, Drake. I as well need to supplement on our submission. And I always prefer to start any particular topic by having the keywords, and if it's anything that has an origin and background, it's important that we first unveil that. It's important to note that civil rights have been perpetual. They've subsisted for thousands of years. if we are to trace it from the Roman and the Greek ancient organs and arrangements, then we later on see the 1215 Magna Carta. That is when these rights were beginning to take shape, to actually be practical and tangible. We saw the Magna Carta being formulated, and in that we saw the powers of the kings. I think King John being limited, because you know in history most of these countries or nations were under monarchical leaderships. But then at this particular point we saw that Magna Carta as the first law. You know, you can't speak of the constitutions and whatnot minus the Magna Carta, because it laid a basis and a foundation for most of these laws. So we later on see the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and now we are saying, at that point we are saying that, of course, that was, we see in history the events. That is also a very important note, that the events that did happen, and of course it was clear at that point that there needed to be a law to tame such incidents or to treat a situation in case they do happen. Of course, we can't speak of that minus looking at American War of Independence, the American Civil War, the 1789 French Revolution, and of course, you know, that gave birth to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the citizens and whatnot. So all that gave birth to the protection of human rights. But as a matter of fact, and what is important to note is that these rights are inherent. But as time went by, these organs or bodies and countries came in to have a very tangible and formulated kind of arrangement to protect these rights. Now, away from that broader perspective and now being specific to our country, and of course we can't talk of our rights minus the Constitution. But under the Constitution, what do we have as very important articles? Specifically, we have Chapter 4 talking about these human rights, and that's why we have most of these civil rights. We have, for example, Article 43, telling us that in as much as you have a right as an individual, but also you must not exercise your right at the detriment of the rest of the people. Then we have Article 44 telling us that some rights are non-derogable. Those should never be touched by the state. But as a matter of fact, by and large, our rights are inherent. They are part of us. What the state is supposed to do is to protect them, but not to grant us the rights. Because you have that by the virtue of you being born as a person, whether you have your disability, whether one eye, but if you qualify to be called a human being, you have those rights which the state is supposed to protect. Narrowing down to our discussion, the nexus between our rights and the
Law enforcement.
The forces or the law enforcement. That's where we have our contested question that is up for discussion today. We are saying that you have a right which you should exercise, but you should exercise it within given limits. Now, our discussion is, at what point have you gone beyond enjoyment of your right and it is now infringement or a detriment to the rest of the people? Whereas we as citizens always say police is being brutal because we tried to make a peaceful demonstration and we are being either beaten or arrested and incarcerated and whatnot. But at the same point, police or any other security agencies are telling you that we did so because you had already gone beyond your right of demonstration. So the contestation is in between. Where do we go beyond? So at the end of the day, we might have to answer questions like, is it intentional? I mean, are these security agencies actually within their margins and it is just us, the population, that is being reactionary? Or is it even the other way around? That is where we have a contested question that each one of us is going to labor to answer, of course, from our different perspectives and experiences.
All right, thank you. That has been a very robust preamble to how exactly we are to take on this conversation. And I would like Andrew to take us away with this particular question. Having understood the quick background of civil liberties, the civil rights, and all from my brother Emmanuel, then it's important to bring in the nexus of how do we balance law enforcement and these civil liberties. We know that in Uganda, our constitution promulgated in 1995, and over the course of the years, it has seen amendments, It has seen a couple of shortfalls, obviously. But the question is, we have still seen, even when they say the Constitution is a document of the people or is the supreme law of this country, oftentimes there are those non-derogable rights, as I said, things to do with torture. You are not supposed to torture people. And when we see the force, our disciplined force, some individuals are going ahead to brutalize and obviously beat up citizens, even when they are not doing anything wrong or they're exercising their civil liberties. So how do we then balance police? How do we then balance law enforcement and civil liberties? Because oftentimes or not, we have seen that law enforcement has curtailed into civil liberties.
Thank you very much, Drake. And I love the fact that you posed this question to me in line with the 1995 Constitution, which is obviously, without any form of doubt, the supreme law of the land, meaning that everything that we do, anything that pertains Ugandans, must be done within the limits of the Constitution. Anything that goes beyond is an illegality, you know. And I want to start by giving you context, and my context is going to come from a bit of history. And I want to give you the two kinds of histories that I would love to refer to. One, that is the history of the current government, because, Drake, we cannot discuss police brutality or law enforcement in Uganda without discussing the regime. By the regime, I mean the NRM government, you know, because from the promulgation of the 1994 Constitution, it has been the one in power. So anything concerning that Constitution and the liberties, rights and liberties of Ugandans has to be, is directly connected with the NRM government, whether I want it or not. Sure. Then secondly, the origin of the 1995 Constitution. So now, when you look at the 1995 Constitution, prior to the NRM government, we did not have it, obviously, yeah? And we had so many sorts of things that are happening right now, happening then, you know? And the reason as to why we have to give credit, and I want to be listened to, yeah? The reason as to why we should give credit to the NRM government at a certain extent is the fact that it came up with something at that point, you know, called the 10-point program. This was a kind of a savior to the people, you know. People looked at it, they believed in it, and when you look at the process that came with the 1995 Constitution, it is one that really spoke to the people, because this process had about 1.5 years of consultations, you know, where you saw the likes of Dr. Miriam Matembe, you know, moving around the entire country, you know, making consultations from the people, you know, telling the people about the Constitution, educating them about the Constitution, you know, asking them what they would want to see in the Constitution, you know. Then you had about 4 years of the Odochi Commission, you know, 4 years of the Odochi Commission before 1995, the year in which the Constitution is now is now set into force, meaning we had about 5.5 years, 5.5 years of making the Constitution, you know, which later on, of course, we see that now the President Museveni comes up and says that the Constitution is just a book, but it's a book that we took 5.5 years to make, you know, meaning that
reflecting the spirit of the people.
Reflecting the spirit of the people, yeah? So in that Constitution, as my colleague Kwesiga already elaborated very well, it has provisions that protect certain rights. And there's one thing that we do not have a doubt on, and that is the fact that human rights and human liberties are inherent. The state cannot grant you these rights. You're born with them, you know? And to that extent, the state only has a duty to respect and protect them. Now, fast forward, bringing it now to the context of Uganda, you know? The reason as to why I bring that history is because now I want to juxtapose the two, the history and what we have now, you know, because the history was good. I don't know about the now, the present. So now, when we look at the status quo, the state of the nation in Uganda right now is one that is characterized by vulgarization of human rights, gross vulgarization, you know, and that has been fueled by police brutality, you know, and that in itself is enough Because when we say that, because you asked me a question and you're talking about law enforcement and human rights, you know, at the same time. Now, we have different acts of parliament, and the Police Act is very clear, you know. When you're exercising certain orders, you know, there's a certain kind of force you're supposed to exceed. And when you exceed that certain kind of force, no matter what the situation is, you know, it is not right. And if you are to look at in the context of Uganda, I do not think that these people have any justification for how they treat and handle Ugandans. There's no justification. Because, let me give an example, clear examples. We will have the November killings, the famous November killings, you know. And when you look at the context in which the police killed,
Andrew,
yes, please.
The justification of the police
Yes.
in such instances is they're also trying to protect the rights of other individuals from being infringed upon.
Yes.
The government is charged with the responsibility of protection and respect of human rights.
Yes.
In doing so, they're enforcing the law because if at all, for example, that you use the November killings, we have business people on the streets of Kampala who want to carry out their business normally. The justification is they're trying to halt protesters who are trying to infringe on the rights, economic rights of business people who want to go on with their business.
Yes.
So then, what justification do you have? Are they going beyond? Are their actions possibly justified from their point of view?
You see, Drake, yeah? You're a lawyer, and I want us now to discuss legally. Yes? I don't want us to discuss with common sense, because clearly, I don't want to say something mean, but the common sense of our enforcers is really questionable. So I want us to argue legally, you know? And in law, we have something called reasonable force, you know? When people are protesting, Drake, I don't think the reasonable force would be that, or would be similar to that force that would be required to be used in Somalia.
And
That when
just-
people, that
just
when
to-
unarmed, yes?
Just to hold you a little,
Yes,
if you can use just the most practical and relevant and most recent example of the demonstrations that were just happened. At least we have no report or any video clip among those that we saw when youth were making efforts to do a demonstration. All we saw and what is on record is that we had all these armored vehicles all over and these people holding the guns and what's not.
And peaceful
But if you
protesters with
look at
placards, yeah.
the manner in which these people intended or actually did the protest and the force that
They met.
with which they were handled, if you are to look at the nexus, I think that will help you explain your point much better.
It's unreasonable, because if you have to look at those clips and the videos, we see that these people are holding placards.
Simply.
A placard,
Yeah.
you know, and nothing more than that, not even a stick, you know. Some of these people are even elderly people, you know. And now that shows you that it goes back to what I was saying. These people have no justification at all, you know. And the march to parliament is just a very small example of what has been happening in this country, you know. There is no reason for civilians to be treated the way they are treated for doing things that are protected under the Constitution. Because the Constitution gives me the right, the fundamental right and freedom, you know, to go out there and demonstrate, you know, peaceful demonstrations. And that is what we have been seeing in the country. But now, where do all these problems coming from? This problem, and that is why I started with the regime, these problems come in because of the fact that we are having a regime, or we are having a disgruntled government that right now is not aware of what it's supposed to do, you know. So when people come up and say that they are marching to parliament, the first form of retaliation they are going to have, because they don't have anything else to do, is to send out the army with their military trucks, circulate around Kampala as if we're in a war zone, and if you dare hold your placard and march to parliament, you're going to be manhandled in the way in which they manhandle us. So for me, I really see no justification, you know, between what the police does, what the army does, and what the civilians are supposed to do. And in any case, why would we have the army handling matters of civilians who are protesting.
Okay.
You know?
Let me just quickly bring in Allen. Allen, from just where my brother Andrew has halted, understanding the current situation, we have seen numerous events happening throughout the year. We have seen the march to Parliament that occurred. We have seen numerous when citizens are exercising their civil liberties in terms of freely exercising their rights on social media, freely exercising their freedom of speech and expression, and oftentimes freedom of expression of who they want to vote for. We have all those civil liberties you can cite. We have seen by-elections happening, but we have obviously we have seen some force being met by the citizens when the police are coming to, to arrest them. And all that sums up the constitutional perspective on police brutality. The Police Act definitely brings out that in a scenario when they are going to, there's a distinction between arresting and there's a distinction between arresting and putting someone in custody. When you're being arrested, they arrest you with some sort of force. And oftentimes when we see this happening, the force that people are met with is extreme. And that has left people wondering whether our force, our police force, has lost the discipline. Because now, if at all we are to raise out issues to do in our constitution, people are supposed to freely exercise their rights. And obviously, certain instances where someone is rebellious, the police is justified to do so. But more often than not, the citizenry could argue that the police is not justified in their actions. Just from where you're sitting and how you see these trends happening in relation to the constitutional mandate and the constitutional powers, is there a possibility that maybe 2025 will present us with an opportunity where we see a different trend in terms of civil liberties and the balancing of law enforcement?
Unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be any difference, because it's been like from the start, like the previous panelists have been saying, it's in history. And to me, I think the police is affected by political influence. To take you back in November 2020, the 18th and 19th, those massacres, I think I remember it so well, like as if it's yesterday. Yeah. Police murdered more than the reported cases. The Human Rights Commission reported over 54 people that were killed, but I think it was even more than that. And we saw the shutting down of the internet for 5 days towards the announcing of one of the presidential candidates. And on the 6th day when he was announced, one of the opposition leaders' home was surrounded by security guards or forces. So you really don't understand whether this election thing, whether this civil liberty thing is a do or die thing. Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be so much difference in what has been happening. And if we are to change, or if we are to witness change, then police has to work on what it's actually working on independently, without the political influence from the government. Yeah.
All right.
So I don't think there's going to be any change, or we expect any change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Emma, I would just like you quickly, in your preamble, you gave us that history, the constitutional history. At this point, I'd just like you to quickly explore the constitutional principles governing policing. And in so doing, I would like you just to relate those principles, whether you think there is a possibility of having them uphold an effective law enforcement than using extreme force and brutality.
Thank you. I hope I got your question right. Precisely, what's your question again?
I'd just like you to quickly explore the constitutional principles governing policing, such as right to life, dignity, among others. and in so doing exploring those constitutional principles. I would like you to bring it in light of whether it is a possibility just from where Allen has stopped in terms of bringing up an effective law enforcement. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that once again. You see, the Constitution is more of, I should say it is in a Bible format. The Constitution makes provisions and the other laws and statutes come in to enforce the same provisions of the Constitution.
Yeah.
If we have Article 28 providing for a right to a fair hearing and all its other components of having a legal representation, either at your cost or at state cost in criminal matters, if you can't afford a representative, of the 48-hour rule that if you've been arrested, you shouldn't be in police custody for over 48 hours, and all that. So we have other provisions and laws coming in to enforce that. But also, even when that is the case, in regard to Article 2 of the Constitution, that is supremacy of the Constitution, I would make this analysis specifically dependent on the Constitution itself, not because it enforces those rights, but because an abuse of a right that should be enforced in another law, it all comes back to obedience or disobedience of the Constitution. Because of its supremacy, all other laws that are inconsistent with it. That's even when you have a judgment made and there is an issue to do with interpretation and whatnot, you have a constitutional court, for example, interpreting it and whatnot. So it all goes back to the Constitution. And so I would stick to a point of, do these organs, law enforcement and security organs, respect the Constitution? Because when I talk about the Constitution, all other laws are embedded therein. Even we have the POMA, that's the Public Order Management Act, and the Police Act and whatnot. Any slight disobedience or divergence from any of these statutes comes back to the Constitution. And my honest opinion is I think it's been a failed kind of arrangement. Karl Marx, a 19th century philosopher that we all know, does write about the law and the state and power and whatnot. And what he specifically says, he makes formal equality, but real inequality. He has that provision when you read much about his writings. He says that even when these laws come in, of course they're made by the state or the government and whatnot, what they provide is formal equality. For example, you have a right to vote, but there is real inequality. He makes that contrast. That even when you have a right to vote and it's collective and you can all enjoy it, but in some parts of the country, for example, we all know you can access it more than the rest of the people, meaning that in actual sense, there is real inequality. So this is simply more like on paper, a form of equality, but what is on the ground is the contrary. So I think that has been a failure. Other factors, I think it's also important that we look at what do we attribute this to. Because in psychology, we have that term, attribution, that everything that happens for a reason. You just things don't just happen. In as much as we sometimes say it is destiny, it is fate, but we cannot say that it is destiny and fate, that it's a fate of our country, that police should be brutal to its citizens. That is if you choose to reason law, but if you choose to be critical to matters, there is a reason. And when you were to make a survey, I imagine from so many Ugandans, you would get different feedback. One would tell you that the regime is intentional about having a stiff control over power, and so many other reasons. Others will give you racial discrimination and all sorts of things. But honestly speaking, I think there has been a failure in that regard. Yes, like I said from the start, it is contested. Police is going to tell you, we did this because of this. But from an honest opinion, imagine you are not Ugandan and you are not Ugandan citizen and also not anywhere in the police forces. And this has been laid to you and facts explained. Honestly, you would tell that from the 100 incidents that happen, you would realize that only a small percentage of that certain percent or even less justifies for the reaction that police makes. But by and large, I think there has been, I don't think, but I give it as a fact, just from my opinion, that there has been immense violation of our rights. Like Karl Marx says still that law is just a tool of state oppression. What the bourgeoisie uses to suppress the proletariat so that they can keep onto power and keep these forces suppressed. This being a largely capitalistic world that we inhabit today. So that is it, and reasons are clear. Of course, there are quite many, but for me, being specific to the Ugandan context, I would attribute it to a political question. And if we were to solve that, it would be a political question. As much as others might be embedded therein, but for me, that takes precedence over the rest of the other reasons and factors.
All right. Andrew, just before we go into the break, maybe in like 2 or 3 minutes, he raises something that I think we need to touch before we first go for the break, and that is the political question which relates to the political will. Does our government have that political will to see to it that people's civil liberties are respected and do not apply excessive force when it's not necessary?
Thank you very much. And very first trick, yeah, I'll take you back to history again, because I'm a historian. I love history. I'm a reader of history, and I understand history so much, because a person who doesn't understand history is someone who typically does not understand where they are going. You know, when we go back to history, we see that the reason as to why the NRA government, the current government that we're having right now, the reason as to why, or part of the reason as to why they go to the bush then to come into power, was because of gross violation of human rights. Yeah, and that's, I just want to talk about that because that is what we're talking about currently. And you ask a question, if I understood it right, does the government have the political will to sort out or fight against the
Police brutality.
Police brutality? And I'll say that currently, I do not think that it is possible. Reason being, it has lost it. It has lost it completely. It has gone off the rails. If it was a train, it has gone off the rails, and it has completely deviated from what it had come with. And what we need currently is not even an overhaul in the current laws we have, because I believe that the laws that we have in Uganda are one of the best in the region. And by region, I mean in the African region. Some of the best laws that we have, you know. So we do not even need an overhaul of the laws. What we need currently is a complete deconstruction of the agencies that we have in Uganda. And by the agencies I'm talking about.
But do you think that will even solve the problem? Because you can deconstruct them, but still have...
Because, Drake, this is where the problem is coming from. The problem is not coming from the laws, you know, because the laws have completely been vulgarized, you know. They're not followed at all. So who are these people that are vulgarizing the laws? Are the enforcers, the police, CMI, under CMI, we have the army and other agencies that are in charge of security, you know. So why do I talk about deconstruction? Because we need to go and revisit what these people are doing, you know, because these people know that for us, when there's a riot and we have orders from above, you know, what we are going to do, we are going to ignore any other thing that we have studied or any other thing that we know, you know, in order to enforce an order. So if you have that kind of mentality, then even the laws that you have are not going to help you. So what do we need then is a complete deconstruction, you know, so that we can be able to retrain and maybe have something better. Because that is where the problem is coming from. That is the origin, that is the grassroots, you know, the orders from above and the complete ignorance about the laws. Because yes, the laws are there, but we're not sure if these people even know the laws, because we don't know what these people are being trained. These people may be trained to follow orders from above instead of following the orders that are supposed to follow. Okay. So if we have such a kind of mentality in the people that are supposed to enforce the laws, then even making better laws or revising the laws is as good as not doing it at all.
Okay. Let's quickly go for the break. But when we come back from the break, I think something that is very pertinent that we need to talk about is the citizen's understanding of the law. because that is also a huge problem. And even if we have a complete overhaul, if you have a citizenry that doesn't understand the laws, then even if you have a complete overhaul, they will still brutalize you anyway. Let's just quickly go for a short break, and when we come back from the break, we will definitely have the conversation going. See you shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Hello there, welcome back from that short break. Right before we went into the break, we've been discussing balancing law enforcement and civil liberties, a constitutional perspective on police brutality. Just before we went into the break, my brother Andrew, you were talking about I'd asked you a question on relation to political will, whether our government has that will to see to it that we at least respect people's civil liberties. And you made your submissions and your argumentation saying we need to have an overhaul into the system. And I want to now pose this question to my sister Allen in regards to, if let's say we go with Andrew's argument and we have an overhaul on the system, but by and large, the citizenry in this country do not have knowledge about the Constitution. In a survey carried out by a particular research institute, I think it's called two something, and they conducted a research in regards to the current young people in Uganda in terms of their abilities to do literacy and numerical skills. 70% of children aged 12 do not have the basic skills of writing and of doing basic math calculations. Now that means there's going to be a huge problem with the generation, and that is just a young generation alone. Now imagine how many more Ugandans are quite illiterate and do not have an understanding of literacy and numerical skills. Now relating this to constitutionalism, because constitutionalism embodies being literate, having at least a knowledge and feel of what your constitution is. We have an overhaul of the system, but a citizen who doesn't know his or her right, will that have a change in the system?
Thank you so much. I think the police is actually one of the agencies that is supposed to be so close to people and friendly to people.
Definitely.
And people would actually be free with the police because it protects their rights and it protects their property. And unfortunately, you find like the police is an enemy. People would rather engage with other agencies rather than engaging with the police. And it makes it a threat that if this, some people, like the largest percentage of the population, take being violated or being tortured as a way of life. If you see police, that's torture. Yeah, it becomes a snake dog for the police. Like that's what it does. So you find like many people, even as young people, who do not know what our rights are, what we are actually entitled to, and it makes it difficult for us when we get tortured. We do not know where to go. We do not know where to. And I strongly believe that the government, together with other agencies like the Uganda Human Rights Commission, should do much in awareness they should do much in awareness, letting people know of their rights. Imagine, like we've had the Human Rights Day. Was it on 10th December?
Yeah.
And I imagine what they do that day, just putting on suits and speaking too much English, and just, you know, that day would actually be for community outreaches, telling people what to do, what their rights are, educating them about the Constitution. Yeah, so there's much that it needs to be done, mostly on ground, in citizens. Yeah. And there's nothing like a citizen who doesn't know about their rights and about their Constitution can do. Yeah, we are going to remain having these crashes with the police, and there's not going to be anything be done. Like nothing's going to be done after we've tortured and we've not reached out to what agencies responsible for these offenses. Yeah. So there's much that is needed to be done, mostly in creating awareness in the communities and the citizens about their rights. And yeah.
All right. Emmanuel, civil society actors have been very key and instrumental in trying to ensure that people understand the Constitution. And the organization, Center for Constitutional Governance, that is the mother of this television, is one organization that sees to it that they try to make the Constitution a people's document. Let's like you to highlight on the role of civil society organizations in light of the shrinking civic space in this country. What role have they done in trying to make people at least appreciate the principles in the Constitution, but also let them fight back against the rising incidents on police brutality?
Thank you so much, Drake. One, I want to respond in the affirmative and admit to one statement you make that civic space is shrinking. That I have no contestation over that. And now zeroing down to your question, the contribution of these civil society organizations to see to it that people are aware and get to know. One important thing that we all need to understand is that in as much as we are one country as Uganda, but the fact of different regions and different parts of the country, look at the contrast between the urban societies and the rural societies. And now for me, having been from the rural setting, from my entire life, and now a few days into the urban city, I have the opportunity which Andrew does not have. Andrew might think he knows much about Uganda and the plight of an average person, but in actual sense he might not know because he's grown up here in Kampala.
He could definitely contest that.
Yes. No, he can't. I know. If he's to do justice to this show, he will admit. And of course, you wouldn't blame a person for having no experience over a thing, because it wasn't his choice that he's been born a cool kid, and
Are you a cool kid?
I'm not a cool kid.
It's not a
giving me big title.
And neither was it my choice that I was born in village, but whichever part you're born from or whichever life you know better gives you a broader view and understanding of that particular background. And now, you see, I always want to, my opinion always like, okay, most times is always on the basis of the average person. You get it? When we are talking about the economic status, when we are talking about human rights, I always want to zero down to an ordinary person, down in my village in Ronyena in Simbabwe district. If we are talking about human rights, how do they, how protected are their human rights? If we are talking about income and the economic aspect, do those people even have the $1 that we claim to say that at least every person in Uganda has $1 per day, which is sometimes not the case. So talking about human rights, from my personal experience, like I said, I've grown up, been born and grown up in the village. Human rights is an abstract to majority of the people. Even most people that in the villages now, I'm being specific to the villages, because later on I want to drive my point to the question of if people in rural areas have equal access to such talks and shows as it is to the people in urban centers. Answering your question, I want to think that these civil society organizations have made efforts, but I want to think that that effort has not been sufficient and not enough, to a point that it is only people in such areas of the country that have access to this. If I am to ask, apart from Kampala and these other parts of the country, where else have you, for example, you come from Gulu, if I'm not mistaken, do you people access these services and these opportunities of being talked to? But these are talks you find in Sheraton. Today, if you walk out right now, you'll find similar talks in Serena, elsewhere in hotels in Entebbe and around Kampala. But if you went on a random
but there are actually some civil society actors who are endeavoring to reach out to grassroots communities as much as they can. Though, as I said, the space is shrinking and there is minimal funding that is available to actually ensure that most organizations can reach out to them, which is caused by the government, unfortunately.
You see, Drake, that is very true, and I am still making this point. And at the end of the day, I want to state it as a fact that I do not blame these civil society organizations. Because the government is a parent, and if a parent has no deliberate intentions for being protective to their child, you wouldn't expect a neighbor to love your child more than you, the parent. So if only the government, in my opinion, has failed to protect our rights, then how would we justify, if any one of you has a view, they could help me and defend this? What then would drive us into thinking that the same government would accord the necessary facilities and accommodation and facilitation to make sure that these civil society organizations can instead do that? At the end of the day, what we see is that these human rights organizations and NGOs are indeed looked at as a target by the government, which I have two standards and two positions about the same. Sometimes it is for justifiable reasons that the government is against them, because sometimes they are under a shield of human rights enforcement and whatnot, and at the end of the day realize a given NGO is running a different agenda. But by and large, even without any justification, government seems not to accord the desired environment to make sure that these organizations thrive. But even when that is the case, I do not take the liability away from these NGOs. I still insist, even when you make your assertion, that they emphasize and they are so much reliant on these urban cities, and people elsewhere have no access to such facilities and these talks. And the moment a person in the deepest village has no knowledge about their rights, then you do not expect to see much of a change given the small percentage. Okay, in as much it might be 60, but 60% is still small of the people here in the central region that have access to these things. So at the end of the day, I feel they've not done enough. Reasons as to why, including government hostility and them not being facilitated by the position, is enough has not been done. And also it is important to note that in this era where our rights are being abused, people's rights are being abused at a global scale, by the way, not just Uganda, it's important that these organizations and bodies double their efforts to ensure that they can make a balance and try to narrow this down, because we must admit, you and I, that human rights abuse at a global scale is on a rise. And if the trend is to be persistent for the next 10 years, I hope this is going to be a very hostile environment for you and I and our children to thrive in the subsequent years.
Definitely. Andrew,
Yes, please.
this is a university show, and it wouldn't be fair to us if at all we don't put a face of the role of students in trying to advocate against the rise in police brutality. As a student leader, in our various capacities, we have seen a rise. All of us on this panel have been greatly involved in either mentorship programs, community outreaches, among others. what best can we as students do to ensure that we try to, first of all, ensure that the citizens, people back at home in the villages, understand their rights, but also be involved in the fight against the rise in such brutality that we're experiencing?
Thank you very much, Drake. Before I go to the role of students, I'm going to first maybe try and say something about the questions that my colleagues have been answering. Now, Drake, I want to maybe depart a bit from what we're trying to, the point we're trying to bring out of educating, because Drake, who tells you that people don't know their rights? Who tells you that people don't know their rights?
Andrew, statistically proven,
Yeah.
if you are to cite out numerous Ugandans and ask them about simple fundamental rights that they are supposed to demand from the government, oftentimes many do not know. Go down to grassroots organizations, simple things like health. People still find it okay to pay for high cost of health, yet it's a prerogative of the government to provide this for the citizenry. Okay. One scenario. Two, education. Education in this country has been highly commoditized, that a person such as myself and our brothers in the villages are supposed to access good quality education. How many of them can access it? And yet it's a right they're supposed to what? Demand, which are still accustomed or relates to one thing to do with right to life. You get, which is also still a fundamental right, relating it to the right to dignity, which are still interconnected and interrelated. Now, those are just simple examples that I'm trying to show you, that people in this country are not aware. They could know, but they're not aware that they're supposed to demand this from the government.
Exactly. I think that's where now the thing is.
Without being prejudicial, just like I said, where we grew up from gives us
no. You see, I want us to understand something,
Andrew,
yeah, because demand.
Making this a contested debate.
I'm trying to make us understand something.
Part of the exercise you are going to have to do this holiday is you are going to make a sample of a given village. Run to that village with your pen and paper. A village, I don't want you to shift from Kololo and tell your residence and then come to. Run out of the city center, go to a village and ask people about their rights.
I don't know why Kwesiga makes this impression of me. I don't know where he gets it from. I don't know, but maybe just to inform Kwesiga, I am a proud product of UPE education. It's on record.
Which schools did you go to?
I went to Kampe Muslim. I went to Kampe Muslim for my earliest education. You know? But aside that, this is what I want us to understand. Yeah, I want us to understand the difference between knowing what you're supposed to have and demanding for it. Yeah, and for me, that's where the issue is. Yeah, because if people did not know that they're supposed to be having something, then we wouldn't be having march to parliament. Then we wouldn't be having change in members of parliament.
On that march to parliament alone.
Listen.
Look at the numbers that turned up.
No, listen.
Andrew,
it's because, guys,
we saw a demonstration.
I think you should protect my time. Yeah?
Okay,
you should first protect my time. I make my case.
Make your case.
Then someone can counter argue on it.
Let Andrew make it.
Because this is what I'm trying to bring out. Yeah. I think for me the issue is bigger than educating people about. Is bigger than educating people about their rights. Okay, Drake, after educating people about their rights, then what?
Andrew.
Then listen, then
okay.
what?
Because, make your case.
Because we see that even the most educated, let me give you an example. We have seen members of parliament falling to this same torture and arrest and what. We have seen great authors, the likes of Kakwenza, falling to the same, Kwesiga, with your education, you could be the next, God forbid, We have seen lawyers, human rights activists, Dr. Kizza Besigye. I don't think there's anyone in Uganda who has been arrested more than Dr. Kizza Besigye, Even from Kenya, the way he was arrested. So for me, I think even before we go into the argument of educating people about their rights, we must educate the enforcers to respect that. Because the reason that's why I'm giving you these members of parliament, the authors and the rest, I'm trying to show you that these people know their rights. If you go to the internet, Kakwenza has written numerous books about human rights and everything, Nicholas Opio, a human rights lawyer, has fallen victim to the same. I don't think any of us here holds more knowledge about human rights than Council Nicholas Opio, you know, members of parliament, you know. These are people who make these same laws. They are fallen victim to the same, you know. And these are people who are educated about these things. The majority of the people, and this is if you made your research and analyzed things very well, and one of the people who was arrested was a panelist on this show, you know, for the march to parliament, you know, you're going to find out that most of these people were students, you know. Most of these people, or if not, 85% of the people that took part in the march to parliament and other protests, these are disgruntled youths who have had a certain level of education, at least minimum senior 6, you know. Of course, others have stopped in different, but at least senior 6, you know. These are people who know something about their rights, you know.
Andrew.
But even with that education, they can. So for me, what am I trying to argue, Drake? What I'm trying to say is that even before we talk about educating the grassroots about their rights and everything and how to demand for them, we should educate the people who are going to enforce these rights, because history and practice has showed us that even when you're aware of your rights, you know, something is going to happen to you and no one is going to give a damn about what your rights are. You know, if a lawyer can be arrested, you know, you cannot argue in front of a policeman today, Drake. If you went outside there and they approached you and they're like, and the policeman approached you, you're not going to tell them, I'm a lawyer, I know my rights. You can't.
All right.
You get. So
the only issue I have with your argument
is
your point stands.
Yes.
Your point stands in terms of educating the enforcers. But the only problem I have with the argumentation is on the examples that you're using.
Yes.
Firstly, when you give us an example of the march to parliament and the people that were involved, young people who have most of them been on the panel here on CivicSpaceTV, who know their rights and know exactly what they're fighting for. The examples of Kakwenza, Kizza Besigye, among other notable people who know their rights, that have been fighting for their rights, all those are notable people that's the example that you use. But let me just give you this simple scenario and make you understand the broader picture. See what happened in Kenya. The political consciousness of the citizenry in Kenya saw a huge overturn in the results, which is a difference here in our country. How many people...
Now, Drake, allow me cut you short.
No.
Because you bring in Kenya, allow me cut you short.
Yes, I'm just showing you the problem with the example. Your point stands. The problem is
now let me show you the context of the example you're bringing. You're bringing Kenya, and this is the importance. In fact, you've made my argument easier, because if you look at the way police and the army, in fact, I don't think
that's why I say
how they handle themselves in front of protesters,
that's why
just opposite without happening.
That's why I said
that's where the difference is.
Your argument stands. Maybe now the other argument we now need to look at is what can we do differently in terms of political will? Because if at all we had the political will to let certain things happen, it would happen. But also the citizenry knowing exactly their rights. You cannot overturn numbers. If let's say all Ugandans knew exactly what their rights are, would you bring tanks and shoot every Ugandan?
Now, let me draw for you an example in Kenya. Yeah, in Kenya, the one that you're talking about recently, in Kenya. Now, prior to all this, before they also had, because Kenya had a deconstruction of their laws after 2007, you know, when they killed over 20,000 people after the election, you know, they had to do a complete deconstruction of all their systems. And that was because of how the international community, how ICC pressed onto them. And this is what happened in Kenya. And now I'll give you a difference between Kenya then and Kenya now.
And guess the spirit of the people then in 2007.
Yes.
The spirit of the people in 2007. And
you're not allowing me to speak. I want to show you how the spirit of the people doesn't matter in the system where
I'm just trying to bring out issues
in Kenya before, in 2007, you saw that the people came out just like the way they came out recently.
And in numbers.
And you saw what happened. Over 20,000 of them died. And what happened in Kenya? There was massive deconstruction of all security systems.
And what was the difference
and
of the people then
afterwards,
and in Uganda
after that, we now see that Kenyans can go up and write about a law, and all the police is going to do is just look at them
what causes
and make
that,
sure they do not cause chaos.
What is the underlying factor there? political,
Professionalism.
besides the professionalism, political consciousness. If you have a politically conscious citizenry that knows their rights, and eventually the police will have to be professional.
The change in Kenya, the change in Kenya should just
All right.
educate what we
Let's
have in Uganda.
just have Allen.
You know? I haven't answered your question. Okay. Now going back to what you asked me, the role of student leaders. I believe students. Sorry.
Yeah.
I believe students have a very, very big role. Yeah, when it comes to political change anywhere in the world, because history has showed us that when you look at ANC, you know, in South Africa, when you look at KANU in Kenya, when you look at in Tanzania, you know, students from University of Dar es Salaam, you know, University of Cape Town in South Africa, all around the region, students have even the Musevenis themselves.
They are students.
You know, they were students. Yeah, so that just shows you that students have a very, very big role. Yeah, when it comes to the affairs in the country, because with students we're dealing with people who have attained a certain level of education.
Yeah.
You know, we're dealing with people who are young. You know, if you went to all these universities, 90% of the people there are young. 90 is a very big percentage, you know. And we are looking at if you are looking at the young people, we are the future generation. Because whether we like it or not, whether they like it or not, the order of nature has to prevail. You know, whether people want to stay in power forever, it cannot happen. And at a certain time, the students that are currently in, you know, opportunity comes to those who are prepared.
Yeah.
You know, the reason as to why we go to university is not to learn. It's not to go and learn how to go and litigate in court, you know, but it is to teach me, you know, how to be a useful person in future, you know. Yeah. So I believe that all these other factors being constant, students play a very big role, you know, because whether we want it or not, the order of nature has to prevail.
Yeah, and your concluding remarks, my brother.
Then my concluding remarks, I think generally, what we need as a country are progressive reforms. Yeah, of course, progressive reforms are political, social, and economic. Yeah, political, you know, we need. I still argue we need a complete deconstruction of the laws that we have in Uganda. Not the laws of the agencies that we have, because the laws are already there, but a deconstruction of the system that handles civilians, you know, and the liberties of people, you know. Also politically, socially now, we need to educate both the people and the forces, you know. At the same time, we cannot ignore one and then look at the other, because if we do not work on one, then the other is going to suppress, you know. And economically, you know, we need to make sure that we improve, because most of the reasons as to why people are becoming disgruntled, you're going to realize that most of these things are economic issues, you know. Economic issues. Uganda is very poor. Ugandans are very poor, you know, and the economy is just becoming worse, you know. So if we have reforms, adopt progressive reforms. By progressive, I mean that we do not need to wake up one day and everything is there, but progressively that this year, the next year, and the other, we see an improvement. Yeah. Then we are going to see an improvement in all sectors, you know, because this has been proved in other countries. So why can't it work in Uganda?
All right. Allen, your concluding remarks. Okay,
to me, I think the accountability agencies should actually be strengthened. Of course, police works under the Inspectorate of Government and Uganda Human Rights Commission. So these actually police officers that commit that torture Ugandans, that torture citizens, should actually not go unpunished. Yeah. So this commitment, like accountability agencies, should be strengthened, and I hope the government can actually do better in training these police officers, because I don't think they know what they do, and some of them just go there. And I don't think if there is anything in their training like professionalism on what they are doing, and I don't know if they train them or they make them aware of what actually are rights of citizens. So that should also be done, and the police should also decide whether it's slowly to substitute Ugandans or to protect their rights. Even the Bible says in Luke 16:13 that you can never serve two masters. you either hate one or love the other. So they should choose one. Yeah. Otherwise, Uganda is at a point of, it's a melting point. Situations are so shameless. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Powerful. Emmanuel, concluding remarks.
Thank you, Drake. You know, when we get to these platforms, we as well learn from each other. And so my worry and disappointment is that we still had a lot to learn from Andrew, but unfortunately, time won't allow, because he leaves so many unanswered questions. He gives us the ideal, and he doesn't seem to show us how that is going to be done. And given the man of his brilliance, I understand that if you as well asked him to give that, he definitely would, and I hope next time we'll be able to learn, because when he talks of overturning the system and whatnot, knowing that he's now at the moment tasking the system to overturn itself in essence. So he has well needed to give us how feasible,
the practicality,
how practical can it be done. But also the two speakers seem to make a point of the security agencies and personnel have no knowledge of what they are doing, and that I disassociate myself. I do not want to. I take a contrary opinion. I think it's even shaming if any person in the forces or in the security agencies admits to that, because these are people that go for training, and in training
they're subjected to a course.
But what are they told in training? That's what we want to know. Yeah. That could be the issue. We could be here fighting the issue of the laws, but when these people are, because I was watching a documentary today, and Kwesiga, I know your man who loves to be informed. You should go and watch a hard talk by Solomon Seraj, and you're going to
on which episode?
Yeah, hard questions, and there's a show. He brings in some security operatives. Of course, their faces are covered, and these people are telling you that for them, when they are trained to go and execute an order from above.
That is what you're supposed to do as
a
trained personnel.
What if the order is...
that is why the argument is political will.
What if the order is to kill you?
You see,
what if the order is to kill
officers of the law, their mandate is to execute orders. So that means if the order is do not kill citizens, they will not kill citizens.
So that's what we want. What are they being trained?
They're already taught. As I've told you, they're instilled in them the idea of execution of orders. So anyway, but the conversation is still continuing. Let's have Emmanuel conclude.
You know, we have the same point, but what is just different is how would we run it if we were both presidents tomorrow. And I would still say it's right, and I would make the same case. The order might be go and restore sanity and order, people demonstrating. Same point he makes, but the question is, when you leave, how do you implement that order? So you realize it is the same principle that we are riding on, but how we execute it is where the difference is. So that I wouldn't want to say that people don't know what they are doing. Maybe I would agree that under given forces and orders, you've been specifically tasked to injure so and so, to injure Drake because he's the frontline command of the demonstration. Those are instances that I would agree that it's been specific. But sort of that, I wouldn't want to justify brutality for these people not knowing what they are doing. That aside, I want to thank you so much for hosting us, and also to, even when every time we claim that as youth we are the future leaders and whatnot, but also what we do from the onset tells much of what we are capable of doing and what we can be able to do in the future. I want specifically thank you, Drake, and we'll come you back from the Gambia where you are a few days ago. And I've seen you go to most of these places quite often, and it's motivating and inspiring to those of us that are your age mates but haven't had such. But at least now we know that a person can be able to acquire knowledge and as well go and disseminate it elsewhere across borders, and so we thank you. But more specifically, I want to thank CCG, the Center for Constitutional Governance. In this country, we have so many radios and TVs and whatnot that have different programs, but you don't meet quite many of them that have audiences and platforms and programs for youth, and this is the CCG is an exception to that rule, and platforms are here for us because I understand that everything starts in the talking, and even the big entities and companies you see started because people sat elsewhere and agreed and disagreed about a thing, and so I believe that this talking doesn't just end here. We learn from each other, and people out there are learning and criticizing. And so at the end of the day, when you amalgamate that, as stated by James Clear in Atomic Habits, you have a much bigger result. Thank you for hosting us, Drake, the crew, and the viewers out there. Thank you for always listening in and making us learn from you and you learning from us.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew, Allen, and Emmanuel, for taking time to join us in this conversation. It's been lovely having you all on the panel, and thanks all for always making time and coming through to CivicSpaceTV. Technical crew, Paul and Brittany, thank you for making this possible. And to you, our dear esteemed viewers, thank you for following throughout the year. And I would like to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Center for Constitutional Governance, CivicSpaceTV, for making all this possible. Thank you very much. And to you out there, as you enjoy this festive season and as you enter into the new year, please take care of yourself and always keep safe. My name is Douglas Onen. See you next time, same time, same place. Bye-bye.